Hello guys, welcome back. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. So on the screen I have the project that we did last time where we left off our Express application. We set it up with TypeScript, right? So we're just going to build on top of it moving forward, right? So in this video today we are building an error handler. We're going to implement it here because we're going to need it throughout the entire project. So it's important that we start with it, or we start with the things that we actually going to need going forward, right? So we are going to do an error handler. So yeah, let's get started. First thing first, the error handler will essentially be our middleware, right? So let's actually have it in here. Let's create a file for it, error.middleware.ts. So what I need us to do is actually to implement a handler or an error handler that will actually handle every single exception that we throw, or every time we throw an error. And then this error could actually be thrown by ours, or it could be thrown by something else, because we're going to be using a lot of libraries, right? So this exception could be coming from us, or it could be coming from somewhere else. So we need to handle both the errors that we are actually going to throw, and also the ones that are not going to be thrown by us, right? So yeah, let's actually not actually let me demonstrate something with the index.ts, right? So in here, if we do this, let's throw an error here. Say we are throwing something, and I need to run this application. What's going on? Let me open this npm run dev. Even with TypeScript, it actually shows you here that if you throw this code here won't execute. But then wait a minute, let's run it. And then for us, because we in the last video I said we actually going to use Postman to test our API, right? Since we haven't really done anything that is worth it for us to use Postman, I'm just going to use Chrome, because we don't really need complicated queries, or right? So let's open Chrome here and go to localhost 3000, and you can see we are throwing an error here, and then it also comes with the stack. So we are throwing something, right? So we need to take care of these things. Whenever there is an exception that is thrown, we need to take care of that instead of having to send all this back to the client, right? So that's what we actually going to handle. Also, even when we handle, even when we actually throw an error, we don't actually get stuff like this. We need to something much better. So that's the reason why we are actually going to have an error handler. So go back to VS. So we need to implement our error handler in here. So we're gonna import the type from Express. So we're going to need some few things from Express, right? We're gonna need the response type, request, and the next function, and also an error request handler here. Also, you can see here the exception we throw is in our console here. The name of our function is error handler, and is of type this. And an error request handler takes four things: an error, the request object. So let's have an error here, which could be any, and we have request, which is this one, we have a response, which is this. And what else? We have the next function, and we have it here. Let me save. So okay, cool. So this is basically our error handler. And then what we're going to do is we simply going to extract few stuff from it. So let me extract the status code, not necessarily from the error handler, but then from the values that we passed, right? We can get the status code from our response.status code. If it doesn't exist, we give it 500. And we can also extract the message from the error.message. If it doesn't exist, we can say there is something going on, right? And then this is supposed to be error. And what do we do? And then we can send back information that is way much better than actually having to send the stack and everything else. So okay, let's attach this value here. We can do this status code and message success. Of it has to be false, of course. In a case where we throw an exception, it means whatever that we were trying to perform, whatever action we were trying to perform was not successful. So that's where we say success. And then usually you want to attach a data property on your object when you send it back to the user. Maybe the user was trying to query, maybe to get to do's, right? So if it's not successful, obviously you won't send any data back. So let's just say the data is going to be none. So this is what we have so far. We have a function called error handler, which handles the things for us. So let's actually export it. Actually, let me do it here. Export default error handler. Okay, so this is simply error handler at its simplest form, right? So how do we use this? We just need to import it and put it in here. So you need to have it at the bottom of your app, because whatever of exception that is thrown up here on your in your application will be catched by our handler in here. So what is it called? It's an error handler, and we managed to import it. Oh no, we import it. So this actually is our error handler. Error handler. And then let me see what's going on in here. Let's restart the server. It's actually running. So let's go back to, so it's running, and we can go to Chrome. So let me try to refresh, and look at now, we are getting a way much better information when there is an exception that gets thrown. We're no longer getting the stack information that we don't need, and we can see now we have a success property and data now. But then also there's something that we actually can do, or we should do, with the way we have set up our error handler, right? I want to show you something quickly. So let me show you something. So this is the exception that actually gets thrown and is cached by our handler here. But then in an event where this exception does not actually get thrown by us, you're actually going to see something. Let me say constant object, and then we say it's any, and then we have an empty object here. Let's say object dot function does not exist. So now we are actually calling a function on this object, and this function does not exist. As you can see, we have an empty object here. So let me save this, and you're actually going to see we actually get an exception, or there's an error that is thrown and is actually cast by our handler here, but then the message is different. Let me see. Let's go back to Chrome and let me refresh here. Do you see the message? It says object.function does not exist, is not a function. What this simply means is saying we're actually trying to call a function that does not exist. I'm sure you know about this error, but you wouldn't really want to send this kind of message back to the user. The user does not care about the functions you were trying to call or whatever syntax error you had, right? So we need to take care of this. So in a case where where an exception is thrown by not us, whether it gets thrown by another library or Express or just JavaScript, we need to take care of that, right? So let's go back to our let's go back to VS Code and actually deal with this. We don't want to send errors like this back to the user, right? So yeah, let's go to and handle that. I need us to implement a class which actually we're gonna call it app error, which extends error. And if you do this and you load up the information, you can see since we are extending from this error, we have message, name, and stack by default because they come from here. But then we also need to have a code like this. And then what is this code? It's gonna be a number. And then we can have our constructor here, and then this constructor is gonna get the code. It's gonna get message. And do we need stack? No, we can just leave it like this. I think it's going to be okay. And then inside this function, since we are using the extend or some sort of inheritance, we need to call this, so we no longer have an error. So this code is going to be a number, and then this message is a string. Where this code is gonna go, we're gonna say this dot code, we assign it the code, this dot message. We have it because remember, this error here we are extending has three properties. It has a name, it has a message, and it also has a stack, right? So it means now we actually have the message property in this class. And then this message here, going to do this dot stack. You can have something like this. Normally when you are developing, you really want to see where this error comes from, right? You can have something like process.env, node.env. So where you actually specify that now this is in production or this is in development. So let's say it's in production. So if this expression is true, that we are in production, we need to give this stack null. If not, actually we're gonna use a ternary. If it's not in production, it means we are in development, so it means we can actually print out the stack. What's the problem? Type string null is undefined to type string type null. Okay, so this is basically what we have, right? We are going to use this class that we just described here in here. So we're going to say whenever there is an error that is thrown, it could be of any type. Of any type, it means this error was not thrown by us, or it could be of app error, or it could be an instance of app error. And then if we have this, it means in here we can have a bit of logic, right? So normally if the error was not thrown by us, we don't have the status code, right? We don't have the code. Let me actually do this. Let me remove this. So if, let me do this, get the value. So we no longer going to get the status code like this. We're actually going to get it like this. Let's say code. We're gonna say error dot code. If this does not exist, we actually going to assign it 500, and the message actually is gonna be similar. We can have something like this. Let me actually just copy this. And so what I need us to do is, if ever the exception was thrown and is not the instance of this error, of app error, we actually going to have a generic message, right? And then if ever the error here is of instance app, we're just going to use whatever values we have in the error object here, right? So in an event where the exception was not thrown by us, so it means error instance of app error. So in an event where the error was not thrown by us, so it means this value here won't be the instance of this. So what do? We're going to have a generic message for it, and then also it will mean we don't have, it also mean we don't have the code, right? So we're gonna have the 500 here, and then say status code dot send, and we say message. We're not actually going to use the message from here, because if the exception was not thrown by us, you'd probably have like some information the user or the client does not need, just like object.function does not exist. We don't want to send a message like that back to the client, so we need to send back some sort of generic message like the problem is on our end. We are working on fixing it. So this way the client doesn't actually know that the person was trying to do something that they actually don't even care about. So this message is generic and doesn't really bombard the user or the client with information they don't need. And message, and then our code or our status of success is also false, because obviously we are throwing an exception, and that is also null. So this is what we have. So in an event where that exception was not thrown by us, this is actually the function, or this is actually the code that will execute. But then if the exception was thrown by us, we're actually going to do simple stuff. Function here, wait, and we're just going to use that message. We're going to use success is actually going to be false. Data is also going to be null. So this, in an event where the exception was not thrown by us, this in an event where the exception is actually thrown by us. So let's go back to our index here. I remember we used in the previous example, actually let me copy this code here and undo. I need this. Save. Actually, let me copy out this part here, and then we are not actually going to throw error like this, right? Actually, let's actually throw an error like this. We are throwing something, and save this and go to Chrome Let's wait for the changes to take place. Starting TS node. Let's open Chrome and then let's reload this. The problem is on our end. We are working on fixing it. And then if you go into our VS Code, you'll actually realize we did not throw an error with this message. So this is in an event where the error is not actually, because we are no longer going to use this syntax throughout our application. So whenever a library throws an error like this, we are actually going to handle it. We're actually going to handle it by saying the problem is on our end. Actually, let me do this again. Actually, let me make an example that is way much clearer. Let me use this one. So here we are actually trying to access a function that does not exist, right? Typically, JavaScript or TypeScript will say what you're trying to do is not impossible. So it will say this is not a function, right? However, we don't want to send that back to the client. Instead, you're actually going to get this message. Look at this. The problem is on our end. We are working on fixing it. And remember, we do not throw this exception. We do not throw an exception actually in our application. We do not throw any exception here in this function, right? But then since this line throws an exception which says this function does not exist, we actually take that exception and we handle it by saying the problem is on our end. We are not going to say this function does not exist. But then how do we actually use our app error, right? So that we actually use this part of our error handler here. So you'd have something like, we're no longer gonna say throw new error like this. We're actually going to throw app error. Oh, we did not export it, so let me export it so we can use it in this file. App error, import it, and then our constructor takes a code which is a status code and then the message. So our status code is gonna be 500, or we can say it's a 404, and then the message is this is our error handler working, and then we save this. So now the instance will be of app error. So this expression will be false. This expression here will be false because the error will indeed be the instance of app error. So it won't execute this, but it will execute this part of our code, right? So open Chrome and this is our error handler working. Boom, you have implemented a working error handler which handles both your exceptions and exceptions that are actually thrown not by you or thrown by your app, or could be thrown by JavaScript, TypeScript, could be thrown natively, could be thrown by Express or whatever, right? Because when you're working with a project, there are probably other libraries, frameworks, or whatever that are not actually implemented by you. So whenever they throw an exception, you are actually going to handle it way much better. Thank you for watching, and we are actually going to build on top of this. So in the next video, we are actually going to do mongoose. We're going to set up our models, and yeah, we're actually going to set up our models, and then from there we're actually going to start implementing most part of our application. So yeah, thank you for checking out this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. See you in the next video.